All right, the Knicks take on the Nets, 1 o'clock Eastern tip-off on Sunday, March 13th, 2022. Brooklyn's -6, totals 225.5. We're 4-0 in our last 4 college basketball tier package bets on brockpage.com. And the link for that bet is in the description section below. $1,000 bettors are up over $3,600 during that stretch. And if you want to see my personal bet record, you can do that for free right now by going to the homepage on brockpage.com. And as good as Brooklyn's looked against, as good as they looked against Philadelphia this past week, these guys have been pretty bad in the Barclays Center this season. The Nets are winning just 41% of their home games, and they're a league worst 6-25 against the spread on their home court. Aldridge, Irving, Simmons, and Duke are out. And even when they're mostly healthy, the Nets are currently in the bottom 10 in the league in points allowed. They're taking on a Knicks team who covered in their last 5 straight. And they do a really nice job on the defensive end of the court. The Knicks are currently in the top 3 in defensive field goal percentage on the road. They've covered the number in 7 out of their last 10 meetings with Brooklyn. Now, scoring-wise, Julius Randle's averaging over 20 points a game, along with double-digit rebounds. Meanwhile, R.J. Barrett, he's scoring nearly 20 points a game himself, along with 5 boards and a couple assists. And speaking of boards, there's really not many who do it better defensively than the Knicks. These guys are currently in the top 3 in the NBA in offensive boards per game. Now, injury-wise, Noel and Grimes are out. Toppin is questionable. When it comes to the total, the Knicks saw unders recently with Dallas and the Clippers. Meanwhile, the Nets, on the other side of things, they saw 3 out of their last 5 fall under the line themselves. I'm going to lean toward the Knicks +6 and the under 225.5. Next game, it is going to be Clippers versus the Pistons, 3 p.m. Eastern start time. The LA Clippers are -4, totals 218.5. And even though the Clippers are down a few guys, well, they played some pretty tough defense this season. LA's in the top 5 in defensive field goal percentage on the road, and they're limiting their opponents to only 107 points a game. Now, scoring-wise, when it comes to offensive production, Reggie Jackson's averaging over 17 points a game, along with 3 rebounds and 4 assists. Meanwhile, Marcus Morris is scoring over 15.5 points a game himself, along with 4 boards and a couple assists as well. Morris is also making nearly 40% of his three-pointers. And speaking of shooting the 3 ball, the Clippers are currently in the top 5 in offensive 3-point percentage. Now, they're taking on a Pistons team on the other side of things who's actually amongst the worst in the league in guarding the 3 ball themselves. And when it comes to, defensive rebounds, the Pistons are also in the bottom 5 in the NBA in home defensive boards per contest. Now, offensively, on the other end of the court, Detroit's averaging only 103 points a game. When it comes to the injury report in this one, Diallo, Jackson, Stewart, and Smith are out. Hayes and Magruder are questionable. Meanwhile, for the Clippers on the other side of things, Preston, Powell, and Covington are still out for them. When it comes to the total in this one, 7 out of LA's last 10 meetings with Detroit fell under the posted number. The Clippers have also seen a good amount of unders on the road this year. They're 22-13 to the under in all of their travels. Meanwhile, Detroit on the other side of things, they are 4-1 to the under in their last 5 themselves. I'm going to lean toward the LA Clippers -4 and the under 218.5. Next game, it is going to be Mavericks versus the Celtics, 3:30 p.m. East. Boston's -6 with a total at 213. And even though I'm not a huge fan of this particular number in this spot here, well, if anyone can cover it right now, it's Boston. These guys have lost only 2 games since January 28th, and they're currently the best in the league in defensive field goal percentage. And speaking of defense, the Celtics allow only 103 points a game at the Garden. Now, offensively, Jason Tatum, he's scoring over 26.5 points a game, along with 8 rebounds and 4 assists. Meanwhile, Jaylen Brown, he's scoring 23 points a game himself, along with 6 boards and 3 assists as well. And speaking of boards, Boston's in the top 5 in the NBA in offensive rebounding per contest. They're taking on a Dallas team who failed to cover recently against the likes of New York and Sacramento. Now, the Mavs are also dealing with a handful of injuries. Chris and Pinson are out. Brunson, Ntilikina, and Finney-Smith are questionable. And even when they're mostly healthy, I wouldn't quite say that Dallas is putting on an offensive clinic. They're actually in the bottom 10 in the NBA in scoring on average per contest. They're also in the bottom 5 in offensive rebounds per game. Now, when it comes to head-to-head meetings between these two teams, Dallas lost 6 out of their last 10 contests against Boston, and they averaged only 103 points a game in those meetings. Now, total-wise, Dallas saw their last 3 straight fall under the line, 5 and 2 to the under in their last 7. Meanwhile, Boston saw 7 out of their last 10 meetings with Dallas fall under the line themselves. So if you're into historical trends, you certainly want to think about that one there. I'm going to go ahead and lean toward Boston -6 and the under 213. Next game, it is going to be Sixers versus the Magic, 6 o'clock Eastern start time. Philadelphia is -12.5, totals 223. And even though the Sixers are playing some pretty good basketball right now, they did fail to cover in 3 out of their last 4 ball games. Now, when it comes to rebounding the basketball, the Sixers really don't do a lot of that on the offensive end of the court. These guys are currently in the bottom 3 in the NBA in offensive boards per contest. They're also in the bottom 10 in fourth quarter scoring. They're taking on an Orlando team who's on a 2-game winning streak themselves. And in addition to that, they've actually done a real nice job covering the point spread recently. Magic's currently 7-3 against the spread in their last 10 ball games. And believe it or not, they actually do a real nice job scoring late in games. Matter of fact, Orlando finds themselves in the top 10 in the NBA in offensive fourth quarter scoring. So these guys, you really can never count them out. With regard to the point spread, that is. That back door is always open because these guys score a lot of points late. Now, Cole Anthony, he's averaging over 17 points per contest, along with 5 rebounds and 5 assists. Meanwhile, Franz Wagner is averaging over 15 points a game himself, along with 4 boards and 3 assists as well. When it comes to shooting the basketball, well, Orlando's also in the top 10 in the league in shooting from the stripe. Now, injury-wise, Bamba and Suggs are questionable for the Magic. Meanwhile, for Philadelphia, Danny Green is out. Now, total-wise, Philadelphia saw their last 3 straight fall under the line. Meanwhile, Orlando saw their last 5 straight fall under the total themselves. 7-1 to the under in their last 8. I'm going to lean toward Orlando +12.5 and the under 223. Next matchup, it is going to be Pacers versus the Hawks, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Atlanta's -12 with the total at 237. And for a team laying a dozen points in this spot here, Atlanta's really done a poor job covering the number lately. They're 0-4 against the spread in their last 4 straight. And they also failed to cover in 6 out of their last 8 ball games. Now, Atlanta's biggest problem here has been their defensive play. The Hawks are in the bottom 5 in guarding the 3 ball, and they're actually giving up 118 points a game in their last 10 head-to-head meetings with Indiana. And speaking of the Pacers, they put up 119 points last night against San Antonio while shorthanded. When it comes to rebounding the basketball, there's really not many in the Eastern Conference who do it better than Indy. These guys are in the top 10 in defensive boards per contest, top 10 in offensive rebounding on the road as well. And speaking of offensive production, Buddy Hield's averaging nearly 20 points a game along with 5 rebounds and 5 assists. Meanwhile, Tyrese Halliburton's averaging over 19 points a game himself, along with 4 boards and 9.5 assists. And even though you really don't think of defense when it comes to the Pacers, just keep in mind, these guys do have a tendency to lock it up late in games. Indiana's currently in the top 10 in fewest fourth quarter points allowed on the road. Now, injury-wise, Stevenson's questionable. Brogdon's still out, just like he was last night. Meanwhile, for Atlanta, big scorer John Collins, he's questionable with a foot. Now, total-wise, Atlanta saw overs recently with the likes of Washington, Chicago, and Toronto. They're also 8-2 to the over in their last 10 meetings with the Pacers. And speaking of those meetings, Indiana averaged 118 points a game during that stretch against Atlanta. They also went 60% to the over in their last 10 outings this season. I'm going to lean toward Indiana plus 12 in the over 237. Next game, Rockets, Pelicans, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. New Orleans is -5, totals 230.5. Now, the Pels have lost their last 4 straight, and they failed to cover in all 4 of those defeats. Having said that, though, it wasn't for a lack of offense. The Pelicans averaged 116 points a game in those losses I just mentioned, and they're actually doing a nice job this year of grabbing offensive rebounds. New Orleans is in the top 10 in the NBA in offensive boards per contest, and they're led by big man Jonas Valanciunas, who's grabbing nearly a dozen rebounds a game. Now, scoring-wise, Jonas averages 17 points per contest. Meanwhile, Devontae Graham, he's averaging over a dozen points per contest himself, along with a couple of boards and 4 assists. Now, you may see an overreaction from the public as McCollum and Ingram are out for today's contest. Having said that, though, the Pels are taking on a Houston team who won just 2 ball games since February 2nd. Now, they also posted a record of just 7-28 straight up away from home this year. When it comes to defensive play, the Rockets have been horrible on that end of the court. They allow more points per contest than any other team in basketball. They're also dead last in defensive field goal percentage. Meanwhile, offensively, well, you guessed it, these guys are dead last in the association in offensive boards per contest. Now, injury-wise, Garuba's still out. Wood and Tate are questionable. When it comes to the total, I'm really not expecting a defensive gridlock in this one. Houston saw overs recently with the Lakers, Miami, and Utah. They also went 7-3 to the over in their last 10 meetings with the Pels. So once again, if you're into historical trends, plenty of overs to go around in this one. And speaking of New Orleans, they averaged 118 points a game during that 10-game stretch I just mentioned with the Rockets. And as far as this year's concerned, New Orleans saw 3 out of their last 4 ball games get over the line. I'm going to lean toward New Orleans -5 in the over 230.5. Next game, it is going to be Grizzlies versus the Thunder, 7 o'clock Eastern start time. Memphis is -13.5, totals 230. Now, the Grizzlies are on a 2-game winning streak, and they're winning a bunch of games on the road this year. Memphis is currently 22-12 straight up when traveling, and they're covering in nearly 70% of those ball games. Now, nobody's rebounding the basketball better offensively than Memphis. These guys actually lead the NBA in offensive boards per game. Ja Morant's actually grabbing nearly 6 rebounds per contest, 27 points a night as well for Ja. Meanwhile, Desmond Bane's drilling nearly 42% of his three-pointers. He's also averaging over 17.5 points a game. Now, scoring-wise, the Grizzlies are in the top 5 in offensive points per contest. They're taking on an OKC team who's gotten the W in just 9 out of 33 home games this year. And they actually got the W just 3 times since February 4th. Now, OKC's been fairly anemic with the ball in their hands. These guys score fewer points per contest than any other team in basketball. And they're also dead last in shooting from the field. Now, when it comes to shooting the 3-ball, OKC's making just 31% of their shots from beyond the arc. Now, injury-wise, Favors, Williams, Robinson, Earl, and Giddey, they're all out. Man is questionable. Meanwhile, for Memphis on the other side, it's possible we'll see a Dylan Brooks sighting here today. He's actually making a real nice recovery from that ankle injury and could potentially play here this evening. Could see him in a limited role. Now, total-wise, 5 out of Memphis' last 8 did fall under the line. Meanwhile, OKC saw 2 out of their last 3 fall under the posted total themselves. Unders against the likes of Minnesota and Utah during that short span. I'm going to lean toward Memphis -13.5 in the under 230. With that, guys, we're going to jump into our next And final matchup of the show, it is going to be Lakers versus the Suns, 9 p.m. Eastern tip-off. Phoenix is -8.5, totals 230. Now, a pretty good number here for Suns backers, in my opinion. They're already 28-8 straight up at home this season. They're leading the NBA in defending the three ball. Matter of fact, Phoenix allows only 105 points a game. And they're limiting their competition to just 43% shooting from the field at home. Now, offensively, Devin Booker's averaging over 25.5 points a game, along with 5 rebounds and 4 assists. Meanwhile, DeAndre Ayton scoring over 16.5 points a game himself, along with nearly double-digit rebounds. When it comes to shooting the basketball, the Suns are currently in the top 3 in offensive field goal percentage. They're taking on a Laker team who gives up a whole bunch of points, and they may have to still go to work without LeBron James. He's battling a knee injury. Now, the Lakers have gotten the W only 3 times since February 5th, and they do currently find themselves 8 games below 500. Now, one of LA's biggest problems this year is the fact that they simply don't travel well. These guys have gotten the W in just 9 out of 30 road games, and they also find themselves in the bottom 5 in the NBA in defensive boards. And when it comes to the injury report, once again, LeBron James is questionable. Monk and Horton Tucker are also questionable for LA. Meanwhile, for Phoenix on the other side of things, Johnson has been ruled out for them. When it comes to the total in this one, Phoenix went 70% to the over in their last 10 ball games. They're also 21-15 to the over at the Footprint Center. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, for the Lakers, they went 4-1 to the over in their last 5 outings themselves. Those were overs against the likes of Washington, Houston, and Golden State, just to name a few. I'm going to lean toward Phoenix, -8.5 in the over 230. With that, guys, that's going to do it for me. Don't forget to check me out on BrockPage.com. If you guys do end up getting a membership here today on my website, just keep in mind you're going to get billed the day you sign up and then the first of every month following that. I always tell folks in every single video, the earlier in the month you sign up, the better. Now, you may be wondering what the difference is between what I do here on YouTube and what I do on my website. Well, what I do here on YouTube is I'll handicap the entire slate of games in any given sport, side and total. What I do on my website is I actually share with you which one of these free YouTube picks on my channel that I'm actually betting on personally. Now, guys, if you want to get access to every single bet that I give out on that website, you're going to want to think about signing up for my board member tier package. But most importantly, guys, got to thank you for joining me right here on YouTube. Really hope you enjoyed all this great free content, all this great free information. And with that said, guys, happy Sunday to you. Best of luck to you. And I look forward to seeing you later on today on my website at BrockPage.com.